Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So today we will be covering chapter 19, which is relationship of organisms with one another and with the environment, but we will not be doing that from the text because it is rather lengthy. And we'll be using the IGCSE biology study and revision guide, right? So that's a very good resource. Obviously it's for the IGCSE, and so there are some differences in the syllabus, but those are really minor. So if you know what's expected from you in the O level syllabus, you can sort of sort through that. There's some additional detail which you can skip. There might be something that's missing, and so you can obviously refer to your own text for that. But as a revision guide, this is a very good resource. We'll be using it to quickly go over the chapter because these are final classes. We still won't be able to complete everything from the syllabus, unfortunately. But as I mentioned earlier, this wasn't an appearing sort of goal. So that's fine in that case. So this is chapter 19 IGCSE as well. It's split into two. It's split into chapter 19 and 20 in IGCSE. The first part is organisms and their environment. And because this is a revision guide, they're starting off with all the key terms. So what that you need to know. So what's a carnivore? A carnivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating other animals. A community are all of the populations of different species in an ecosystem. Right, and so they're defining all these terms right at the start, and they'll be used later on. So they're not going to define it at that point. Right, they're going to refer you back to the key terms at the start of the chapter. So a consumer is an organism that gets its energy by feeding on other organisms. A decomposer is an organism that gets its energy from dead or waste organic material. An ecosystem is a unit containing the community of organisms and their environment interacting together, right? So it's not just the organisms, it's the environment as well. That's an ecosystem. A community is all the different populations in an ecosystem. A food chain is a chart showing the transfer of energy from one organism to the next, beginning with a producer. A food web is a network of interconnected food chains. A herbivore is an animal that gets its energy by eating plants. A population is a group of organisms of one species living in the same area at the same time. A producer is an organism that makes its organic nutrients from sunlight through photosynthesis, usually through sunlight using photosynthesis. And a trophic level is the position of an organism in a food chain, food web, or an ecological pyramid. Right now, if you're new to this, obviously this all seems very confusing because again, this is a study and revision guide. So the premise is that you already know all of this and you're just using this to review your concepts. So energy flow, right? The main source of energy is the sun, right? And that is utilized by photosynthetic plants and some photosynthetic bacteria that convert it into organic molecules. This stores that energy into organic molecules. And so those photosynthetic plants are the primary producers, right? Or just the producers. And then, right, so these guys are also known as autotrophs, right? AUTOTROPHS, autotrophs. Right, because they make their own food. So heterotrophs or heterotrophic organisms obtain their energy by eating plants or other animals, right? And those animals would have at some point eaten plants, right? So the energy flow is sun to producers, producers to other animals, right? Either the animal is directly eating the plants or it's eating an animal that has eaten plants at some point. So all organisms directly or indirectly get their energy from the sun, right? And the chemical energy is then in the form of organic molecules passed from one organism to the other. And unlike water and elements such as carbon and nitrogen, energy does not return in a cycle, right? So carbon cycle or nitrogen cycle and stuff like that, and like goes in, comes back. Energy is sort of, it doesn't go back to the sun, right? Now we know that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it's converted. And so that energy from the sun is stored as organic molecules, it's transferred. A lot of it is lost, right? And so the actual amount of energy transferred from one trophic level to the next is lower, right? So a food chain, for example, over here, right? You've got maize, which is a producer, so that's the first trophic level. Then you've got a locust, an insect that feeds on the leaves of the maize, so that's a primary consumer, right? Primary meaning first. Then you've got a lizard, which is a secondary consumer, it's eating the locust. You've got a snake, a tertiary, the third level consumer, that's eating the lizard. And then you've got a mongoose that's hunting the snake, so that's a quaternary level consumer, that's the fourth, right? And so you've got 5 trophic levels in this food chain, right? The maize being the first trophic level, then this is the second, even though it's the primary consumer, but in terms of level, it's number 2 and 3, 4, and 5. Okay, and so with each level, the energy being transferred is less and less, and that's why, right, the locust is going to eat a number of leaves, right? The lizard is not going to eat just one locust, it's going to eat a number of locusts. A snake is not going to eat one lizard, it's going to eat a number, and a mongoose is obviously not going to eat just one snake, it's going to eat multiple snakes, right? So these are obviously sequentially larger and larger animals. And this is how a food chain normally is, right? So we can come across some oddities, right? And so we also need to know how to explain those, right? Obviously this food chain can go on, right? The mongoose can die, for example, if we stop, or you can have a hawk or an eagle, right, hunting the mongoose or something like that. And then, right, the eagle is maybe an apex predator, and so when it dies, it decomposes, and so you can have like trophic level number 6 and 7 and maybe 8 or something. It can go on. Now they're not going to give you normally that sort of those many trophic levels. Normally it's like 4 to 5 that you get, so easy to handle. And so the explaining all of that, a food chain starts with a producer, right, gets its energy from the sun, and they always point towards, right, the arrows in the trophic level always point towards the eater, right? And so each feeding level is known as a trophic level. So plants are producers, animals are consumers. The primary consumers are herbivores because they're feeding on plants. And then, right, the secondary and tertiary and quaternary and whatever are called carnivores because they're eating other animals. Remember, locusts are also animals in terms of classification. And then when an organism dies, it may be broken down by a decomposer, and those are organisms that get their energy by breaking down dead or waste organic material. Okay, and right, and so when you put multiple food chains together, you get a food web. So food webs are a more accurate way of showing feeding relationships than food chains because most animals have more than one food source, right? So for example, right now this is not the best, but grass can be eaten either by the locust or it can be eaten by a herbivore, an impala, right? And so the impala can be fed on by, right, the leopard, or there could be a longer route that the locust, and then the locust is eaten by a scorpion, the scorpion is eaten by a baboon, the baboon is hunted by a leopard. And so in this food web, the leopard is the apex predator. If we try and take a look at that over here, so here is an example of a food web, right? You've got vegetation. That vegetation can be consumed either by the beetle or the rat or a hare, right? The beetle will be consumed by the snake will also eat the rat, right? The rat will also be hunted by the eagle directly, which is the top of the food web, as you can see. It can also be hunted by the mongoose. The mongoose will also hunt the hare. It will also hunt the snake, right? So, right, it's sort of all leading towards the mongoose. But at the end, the eagle will eat the mongoose, the eagle will eat the rat, the hare as well, and the snake. So that's the apex predator right? The top of the food web in this case. And so you can see that's a rather complicated relationship, right? And in real terms, it can be even more complicated. Okay. So they're mentioning over here that food chains and webs are easily unbalanced, especially if one population of organism in the web dies or disappears. Humans can be a cause for this, right? Or it could be due to the introduction of foreign species, right? And obviously they could be they could outcompete the native species. They could be invasive, other issues like that. Right, so for example, if all the baboons were killed by hunters, the leopard would only have the impala to feed on, and so the leopard population would decrease. Right, the scorpion population would increase because there's no baboon to feed on that, and the leopard's not going to eat on the scorpions, and so you've got more scorpions, they're eating more locusts, and so the locust population will also reduce, and that's going to have, right, so that's going to really disbalance, put the food web and then the ecosystem, right, in disharmony. Okay, now when we're talking about the different trophic levels, there's this pyramid of numbers, right? Starting, you always start from the producer. Now, right, what the pyramid of numbers represents is how many individuals of a population of that trophic level exist. So typically, a pyramid of number looks like this, right? Each trophic level, like the lowest trophic level has the most number, and then each successive trophic level going from like the producer has the highest number, then the primary consumer has less number than the producer, the secondary consumer has less number as compared to the primary consumer, and so on, right? And so you've got in terms of numbers, there's a lot of grass. There are fewer antelope as compared to the grass. The antelope are the primary consumer, and then you've got fewer lion as compared to the antelope. The lions are secondary. So this is what a typical pyramid of numbers looks like. But, right, sometimes it looks like this over here in figure 19.3. So, right, an oak tree. Now you could say, well, an oak tree has a lot of leaves. Yes, but we're not counting the leaves. We're taking the tree as one organism. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you have only one oak tree, and there are a lot of caterpillars on that oak tree. And so you can see that the number is much greater as compared to the oak tree. Then you've got blue tits, which are a bird, right? And they're feeding on the caterpillars. So the number of birds is less than the caterpillars. Then you got the owl that's hunting the blue tits. And so, right, those are obviously lesser in number. So this makes sense. And then you got fleas on the owl, and the fleas are feeding on the owl. Maybe as a decomposer, maybe it's just living there and feeding off of it as a parasite or something, right? And so each owl, like one owl will carry a number of fleas, right? So more than one, obviously. And so the number of fleas again is more than the owl. And so you can see this is not what a regular pyramid looks like, but you can come across situations like this. You can come across situations like this. And so it's not something, if you do, right, then it's not, you should not like worry. It makes sense, right? You should be able to reason why that is. Another pyramid that's drawn is the pyramid of biomass, and this one is the one that always looks like right, a pyramid. So, and they're saying that the pyramid of biomass is more useful. It is more useful to measure the amount of living material. So biomass is living material at each level over a fixed area. Once this is done, a normal shaped pyramid is usually obtained. Right, so the mass, even though an oak tree is one, but as compared to the caterpillars, the mass of the oak tree is the greatest. The mass of the caterpillars is obviously less than the oak tree. The blue tits mass is obviously less than the caterpillars. Owl is less than that. And even though there are lots of fleas on each owl, their mass is less as compared to the owl itself. And so you get a regular pyramid when you get pyramid of biomass. Right, then there's a third type of pyramid, and that is the pyramid of energy, right? And that shows it's a graphical representation of the flow of energy through each trophic level, right? And right, it also normally ends up as a regular pyramid, right? So you for this you need to sort of calculate the energy over a fixed period of time, and so normally, right, they do it over an year. So the energy available in a year's supply of leaves is compared with the energy needed to maintain a population of insects that feed on the leaves. Okay, so the producers at the base of the pyramid will have the greatest amount of energy, and each successive trophic level would show a reduced amount of energy, and so you're going to get a regular pyramid shaped pyramid. Now they're comparing that advantages of pyramids of energy over other food pyramids. They're never inverted. So even for the pyramid of biomass, they said it's usually pyramid shaped, but there could be a situation where it's an unusual, right, uh, setup. But the pyramid of energy is never inverted, right? So you always have the greatest energy with the producers, and then less and less energy as you go up. It takes into account they take account of the rate of production over a period of time, so they can be compared with other energy pyramids. The amount of solar energy entering at the producer level can be taken into account. They can also be constructed using data from all the organisms involved in the food web or for the whole community in an ecosystem. So you can do a large scale pyramid of energy. And then they show the efficiency of energy transfer. So as I mentioned, energy is not transferred 100%. Why? It's lost at each level because it's lost through respiration. It's used for movement. It is used to keep animals warm in case of warm-blooded, and it's also lost as heat in that case. Right? It's lost in their waste, and some of the materials in organism being eaten is not consumed. Right? So for example, we eat vegetables. We cannot uh, digest cellulose, and so the energy in cellulose is left, and it's lost as waste, right? So it's obviously it's not coming into us, and it's not being passed, like, right, we hopefully we are the apex predators in our food web, right? But similarly for other animals that are unable to digest cellulose, for example, right, if they are omnivorous. So even plants do not make use of all the light energy available to them, and this is because some of it is reflected off the leaves, some of it, the wavelength is not used by the chlorophyll, some of it passes through the leaves without being utilized by the chlorophyll, and right, some of the light does not fall on the leaf at all, right? So even like 100% of the sun's energy is not being utilized by, right, the producers. So they're saying that on average, 90% of energy is lost at each trophic level. And so they give an example over here that if there are 100 units of energy, of course, like it's not physics, we're not doing like joules. Like if there are 100 units of energy in the producers, then the primary consumers, 90% loss would be 90 units and only 10 units are transferred. Then again, a 90% loss would be 9 units, only 1 unit is transferred to the secondary consumer. And similarly, only 0.1 unit of energy is transferred to the, and that is why the snake needs to eat more lizards, right? And so the mongoose will eat more snakes, etc. And so in case of humans, right, we are getting about 1 unit, for example, right? Because we can either eat the cow that's eating the maize, or we can eat the maize directly. And that in that case, in that, like, so this is like a promotion of the, eat more greens, eat more vegetables, right? Because that way we are getting energy directly from the producers, and so we're getting more energy out of that. All right. So next up, any questions? I know I'm sort of rushing through this, but yeah, as I said, I don't have much of a choice at this point. We still won't be able to complete the syllabus, but yeah,
Yeah. It's not that hard as
it
well.
it, it isn't it isn't difficult, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, the carbon cycle. Now the different cycles given in the O level syllabus. Right, you've got the carbon cycle, you've got the nitrogen cycle. So you've got those two. Okay, all right, they're given over here. So the carbon cycle, right? You got carbon being produced due to combustion of fuels, respiration, decomposition. So that's all going into the atmosphere, right? And it's the only way it's being returned is by photosynthesis. Okay, and so they've explained that over here in bullet points. So I'm kind of going to go, skip that. Then they mention the environmental effects. So if there's an increase in the combustion of fossil fuels, or if more trees are cut down, so either you're putting in more into the atmosphere, or you're removing the trees which are able to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it back into the food web, right, into the ecosystem. In either case, if it's not replaced, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere will increase, which will contribute to global warming, right? And so the carbon dioxide forms a layer in the atmosphere which traps heat radiation from the sun. So that's the greenhouse effect. And this can cause a gradual increase in the atmospheric temperature, which can lead to the melting of polar ice caps, causing flooding. It can cause a change in weather conditions in some countries. Again, maybe increased flooding, maybe reducing rainfall, or changing farmland to desert, right? Again, the effects can vary. And it can, because of all of that, cause the extinction of some species that cannot survive at higher temperatures. Okay. Now, the nitrogen cycle. So they're referring to figure 19.6, which is on the next page. Just take a look at that. And so this is a bit more complex. You've got nitrogen in the atmosphere. It is utilized by nitrogen fixing bacteria in the nodules of some plants. Those are called leguminous plants, right? And right, so it's taken out of the atmosphere that way. Then there's nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil directly. Then it's put into fertilizers, and then lightning can also cause it to go convert. And so with all of that, it's going to become nitrogen compounds in the soil. It will also come from the waste of animals, from the decomposition of dead material, right? Those compounds in the soil will either, there's nitrogen fixing bacteria, there's also nitrifying bacteria, and so that will convert it and make it nitrogen that can be used by plants, or it will be converted by denitrifying bacteria and return it as nitrogen to the atmosphere. And then there's this part where the animals feeding on the plants, and again the death or the waste material. It's a bit more complex. Let's take a look at this. Nitrogen fixing bacteria convert nitrogen gas into compounds of ammonia. Nitrifying bacteria convert compounds of ammonia into nitrates, and denitrifying bacteria break down nitrates into, so these are the three main things that are happening. Okay, and they're saying that you need to know the roles of the three main types of bacteria involved in the nitrogen cycle. So these, nitrogen fixing bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, and denitrifying bacteria. Nitrogen itself is very unreactive, right? And plants are not able to change it itself, but they need nitrogen for making proteins, right, for the amino acids. And so nitrogen compounds become available for plants in the soil by nitrogen fixing bacteria, by the breakdown of dead plants and animals by decomposers, by the addition of artificial fertilizers, and from lightning as well. Okay, so the nitrates are so for the plants that take up nitrates from their roots, they're combined with glucose to form amino acids and proteins, and those are passed along the food chain because animals can't make their own proteins, so they depend on the producers for that. They can't make their own amino acids, right? And but they need plants for the amino acids, or other animals that have fed on plants. So that same scenario, right? And so those are digested. We've done digestion. So those proteins are digested, the amino acids become available, and so the animals make their own proteins, but they need amino acids coming in the form of proteins of whatever they are consuming. So the surplus amino acids cannot be stored, and so they're broken down the liver in a process called deamination. We've studied that. Right, some soil bacteria, denitrifying bacteria, break down the nitrogen and release it back into the atmosphere. Right, and this is a destructive process commonly occurring in waterlogged soils when there's a lot of water in the soil. Farmers try to keep the soil well drained to prevent this from happening, because if it's going back into the atmosphere, the levels of nitrogen in the soil drop, and so the plants are affected. Nitrates and other ammonium compounds are very soluble, and they are easily leached out of the soil and can cause pollution. So that is something that leads to eutrophication, which they are mentioning is given in the next chapter. Right? Now, how much of this do we have left? I don't believe we have the population thing. Let me check. So obviously all of this is given in, oh, we do have the population thing over here. There was something that was missing. Anyway, we'll see. Okay. So you need to be able to define the terms community and ecosystems that the terms population, community, and ecosystems are associated with. Right? So individuals of the same species are a population. One population along with other population is a community. We mix that community with the non-living part of the environment, and that is the ecosystem. So this is a very good way of explaining this. So in a lake, for example, the animal community will include all the fish, insects, crustacean, mollusks, and protoctists. The plant community will include the rooted plants with submerged leaves, the rooted plants with floating leaves, reed-like plants that are growing out of the water, right, starting in the water and growing out of the water, plants floating freely on the surface, and algae in the surface waters. And so the ecosystem is all of this, right, plus the non-living part, which is the mud, the water, the minerals, the dissolved oxygen, the soil, and the sunlight. So factors affecting population growth. The rate of growth of a population depends on the food supply. So obviously, the more food available, right, the more the population can feed, the more reproduction, the more food available for offspring, etc., etc. Competition, right? So if the population, individuals of a population are competing for food and shelter, and so, right, the ones that are able to get more of it will survive and they'll reproduce and they'll produce offspring, as opposed to the ones that are not, and so they'll die off. Predation. So if there's a lot of predation, then obviously survival, and because of that, breeding will be affected, and so there won't be as much offspring for that organism, and so the population will drop. Right? If the predation slows down, and so right, the prey organism will get some respite, and it will able to reestablish its population. Now, this is stuff that normally happens in an ecosystem, right, in a community, without human interference. So the populations fluctuate; they don't stay steady. Right, disease. So if there's a disease outbreak and maybe a significant number of like individuals of a population are affected and die off, then obviously that's going to affect them for at least some period of time. Okay, this is the part that this is what confused me, right? The sigmoid population growth curve is not part of the O level syllabus, right? And so we'll skip that. Limits to population growth. A limiting factor such as food takes the effects as the population becomes too large for supplies to be sufficient. Means that if there's a lot of individuals of a population, and so food becomes a limiting factor, there's not enough food for everyone, and so the population growth rate will go down, right, until births and deaths are equal. So as many offspring are being born as, individuals of the population are dying. At this point, there is no increase in number, obviously, because death equals to birth. And so still, if food's running out or this disease or something else, in this case we're talking about food, and so more organisms will die as compared to being born, and so the population will drop. Now this is obviously an explanation of the sigmoid thing, right? Itself is not part of the O level syllabus, but right, it's useful to understand how the different factors in an ecosystem affect, because food in a sense is, right, not like well, actually it is a living part, so right, so it is a living part, and so how that is related. Okay, so as I mentioned, that chapter 19 from O level is split in to two over here in the IGCSE revision guide, and right, this one is about the human influences on the ecosystem. This is mostly reading, right, honestly. So let me just quickly see. I mean, the issue is that we don't have enough time to cover all of this. This is mostly reading, honestly, right? And so the human effects, right? First of all, biodiversity is the number of different species that live in an area, and sustainable resources are ones that can be, replenished, right? A resource that is produced as rapidly as it is removed, so it does not run out. And so larger populations require more food, right? And so to improve agriculture, because that's the main source, right? You have agricultural machinery, which allows large areas of land to be efficiently made use of for growing crops. Then you've got chemical fertilizer, which increase the nutrient content of the soils, which allows more crops to grow with higher yields. And so fertilizers, NPK, so that's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? Those are the main types of fertilizers used. Then use of insecticides to kill off pests, use of herbicides to kill off weeds, right? Weeds are any plant that you don't want growing along with your desired crop. And then selective breeding, so you take two different crops. In this case, it can also be done with animals, and you say, okay, when this has one trait that I like, for example, it has big grains, and this has another trait that I like, it has, for example, a good flavor or good something, right? And so you crossbreed that. Well, actually, this is the crossbreeding, right? So that's different. So selective breeding is you take the plant that has bigger grains as compared to the smaller grains, and you use that plant to grow the next batch of crop. And so hopefully over a few attempts, you're going to have crops that have bigger grain in general, and so that's selective breeding. Similarly, for example, livestock, right? You're going to selectively breed the cows that produce more milk, and so you're going to get cows in general from that line that produce more milk as compared to other cows, right? So that's selective breeding. This is not something that would happen naturally, right? But because we are interfering and we are choosing which cow to breed or which crop to plant, and so that happens. Monoculture is a crop grown on the same land year after year, right? So every year, for example, we are growing wheat on the same land, so there's an advantage, right? There's an increase in crop yield. Why? Because the land is maintained so that all the organisms that feed on or compete with or infect the crop are eradicated, right? So there's nothing that's affecting the growth of the crop, and so the crop yield is increased. It can be managed more efficiently because you're just dealing with one type of plant every year. More crops can be grown on less land, and there's greater profit. But there are disadvantages, right? The number of species in areas reduced because you're killing things off, right? There is a negative impact on food chains for the same reason. The removal of hedges reduces nesting sites of birds and habitats of other organisms, and the use of pesticides on monocultures can reduce the number of important insect pollinators that are required to grow wildflowers, and that is a different problem. Then you've got intensive livestock production. So that is also known as factory farming. So chickens and calves are often reared in large sheds instead of in open fields. The advantage is that you get a high yield. Many of the systems required to rear animals can be automated, which is cheaper, and there's greater profit. There are problems, obviously. The animals' urine and feces are washed out of the sheds with the water, forming slurry. This goes into the water, right, streams and rivers, and there's excess of nitrates over there, which will cause eutrophication. Overgrazing can, from too many animals, and so they eat the grass down to the roots, and they trample the surface of the soil into a hard layer, and right, rainwater cannot penetrate into the soil, so it runs off carrying the soil, and there's erosion, right, and so that land becomes unusable. And being in confinement in large numbers can make animals more vulnerable to disease and have less disease resistance. Okay. So maybe a little more before we wrap it up. Habitat destruction. So this obviously leads to a loss in biodiversity, right? And there are three key reasons for habitat destruction. An increased area of land is needed for the growth of food crop, livestock production, or housing human populations. And we need more raw materials for the manufacturing industry, so we're cutting down these natural resources, right? We're extracting these natural resources, and so that's causing a destruction of habitats. Aquatic habitats are becoming contaminated with human debris, including untreated sewage, agricultural fertilizers, pesticides, non-biodegradable plastics, and waste oil, leading to marine and freshwater pollution. If human activity causes one population of the organism to die or disappear, the entire food chain and food web becomes unbalanced, as we've seen earlier, and that's obviously going to affect everything. Right? And it could eventually lead to the destruction of the entire habitat. So the undesirable effects of deforestation. Deforestation is the removal of large areas of forest to provide land for farming or road, or for getting wood, timber for furniture, or for fuel, or for building residences for humans, right? And so that results in habitat destruction on a massive scale, and that can cause animals living in the forest to lose their habitats and sources of food, and they might become extinct, right? Or definitely biodiversity is reduced, if not extinction. Soil erosion is more likely to happen because we know that plants and trees and everything hold the soil together, right? And so if that's not there, soil erosion is more likely to happen because there are no roots to hold the soil in place, and the soil can end up in rivers and lakes, destroying the habitat. So they're mentioning that again and again, and so we're going to get to eutrophication, right? Tomorrow, I'll stop at pollution today. Flooding becomes more frequent as there is no soil to absorb and hold rainwater, and so plant roots rot and animals drown, destroying food chains and food webs. And finally, carbon dioxide builds up in the atmosphere because you've removed plants that can bring the carbon dioxide back, and so that's going to lead to global warming, right? Less photosynthesis, increased greenhouse gases, more global warming, climate change, and all the effects we did earlier. So I'll stop here. Right, we'll talk about pollution tomorrow a bit more, and yeah. Any questions?
No.
I did intend to complete this today, fell a bit short, but we'll sort of wrap it up tomorrow. All right?
Yeah.
All right. See you next time, inshallah.
Laugh.
Allah Hafiz.